Arjun had always been a dreamer, but lately his dreams had become a prison. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of his own potential pressing down on him like a physical force. He was waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect opportunity, a sign from the universe that it was finally his turn. He felt small in a world that celebrated the loud and the lucky. He felt stuck, like a seed buried too deep in the soil, unable to break through. He felt like he was starting with nothing, no money, no connections, no one who truly believed in him. The cruelest voice, however, was his own, whispering a truth he feared: no one is coming to save you. That thought was a cold, hard rock in his stomach. He had spent years hoping for a savior, a mentor, a lucky break, a sudden windfall. But the silence that met his waiting was deafening. One evening, after another day of watching his dreams from a distance, he walked to the edge of his small town. The road forked. One path was the familiar, well-trodden one that led back to his small apartment, his comfortable routine, and the quiet ache of unfulfilled potential. The other path was overgrown, wild, and led into the unknown. He sat on a boulder at the fork, feeling more lost than ever. He thought about the life he was living, a direct result of his past decisions, the jobs he'd settled for, the risks he'd avoided, the words he left unspoken. And then he thought about the life he could live. It wouldn't be built by waiting. It would be built by what he chose to do today. A memory surfaced. His grandmother, a woman who had raised 5 children on a meager farm after his grandfather passed away. He remembered her hands, calloused, wrinkled, but always moving. He asked her once how she managed. She had laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. She said, every great person once stood exactly where you are. They had doubts, they had fear, they faced failure, but they did one thing differently. They didn't quit. He had dismissed it as the simple wisdom of an old woman. Now, sitting at the crossroads, her words felt like a lifeline. He understood then that his pain wasn't a weakness, it was his power. Every failure he had faced was a lesson. Every rejection was a redirection. He was not starting with nothing. He was starting with the sum of his struggles. With a deep breath, Arjun stood up. He didn't take the easy path. He took the one that scared him. He took the one that required him to save himself. He started where he was, using what he had. He had a knack for carpentry, a skill he learned from his grandfather. It felt small, insignificant in a world of tech startups and overnight sensations. But he began. He worked out of his tiny garage, building small pieces of furniture. There were no customers at first. The silence was louder than any rejection. He faced the problems: poor materials, flawed designs, the sneers of neighbors who saw him as a failure, who couldn't accept a real job. He didn't run. He faced them, fought through them, and grew through them. Motivation was a fleeting guest. Some days it arrived, filling him with fire. Most days it didn't, but he had discovered something stronger: discipline. He woke up earlier, not because he felt like it, but because he decided to. He worked harder, even when his back ached. He stayed focused, turning off the noise of the world that told him to give up. He learned from his mistakes, turning a wobbly table into a masterpiece of stability. He was building his empire, one quiet, disciplined day at a time. There were long nights when failure seemed to be his only consistent partner. A commissioned piece would crack, a promised sale would fall through. Money was so tight that doubt became his constant companion. He would stand in his workshop, staring at his reflection in a dusty mirror, and the voice would return: "You're not ready, you don't have enough skill, you're not good enough." But he had learned to listen to a different voice, the voice of his grandmother. The voice of his own will. He'd remember that every successful person started confused, started uncertain, started with fear, but they started anyway. So he would take a deep breath, wipe the dust from his hands, and get back to work. He stopped comparing his journey to others. He saw old classmates with fancy cars and big titles, but he no longer felt the sting of envy. He understood that someone else's success was not his failure. His time was coming, but only if he stayed focused, patient, and consistent. Then came the moment that tested everything. A wealthy businessman from the city, known for his refined taste, had heard about the garage carpenter who made things that didn't just function but told a story. He came to Arjun's workshop and commissioned a large, intricate dining table, a centerpiece for his new home. It was the opportunity Arjun had been waiting for. For 2 weeks, he poured every ounce of his being into that table. He chose the wood with reverence, carved with a focus he'd never known, sanded until the surface felt like silk. The night before it was to be delivered, he applied the final coat of varnish. He stood back, exhausted but exhilarated. It was the best work he had ever done. The next morning, the businessman arrived. He walked around the table, his expression unreadable. He ran a finger along the edge, inspected the joinery, and then his face hardened. "This isn't what I wanted," he said, his voice cold. "The wood grain is wrong. The dimensions are off. I can't take it." He left without another word. Arjun stood in the middle of his workshop, the silence now a crushing weight. He looked at the table, the culmination of his dreams, now a monument to his failure. The old voice screamed at him, "See? You're not good enough. You should have stayed on the other path. You've wasted everything. He felt like quitting. He wanted to take a hammer and smash the table to pieces. His hands clenched into fists, tears of rage and defeat burning his eyes. He was at his lowest point. Then slowly he heard another voice. It was his own, but it was different. It wasn't the voice of fear or doubt. It was the voice that had kept him going for all those lonely nights. It said, "Failure is not the end. Failure is a lesson. Learn from it." He stopped. He looked at the table not as a failure, but as a lesson. The businessman had been wrong about the dimensions, but the wood grain, it was perfect. He had been so focused on pleasing someone else that he had almost betrayed his own craft. He didn't destroy the table. Instead, he made a decision. He would not let this defeat him. He would use it. He took the best photos he had ever taken of that table. He wrote its story, the journey of the wood, the countless hours, the vision he had for it. And for the first time, he shared it not as a product for sale, but as a piece of art, a piece of his soul. He posted it online. The response was unlike anything he had experienced. People didn't just see a table, they saw the passion, the perseverance, the story of a man who refused to quit. And the post went viral in ways he never imagined. Orders began to pour in not from the city businessman, but from people who resonated with his authenticity. They didn't want a generic piece of furniture. They wanted a piece of his journey. Years later, Arjun's workshop was no longer a garage. It was a sprawling space filled with artisans he had trained. He had a reputation not just for craftsmanship, but for integrity and heart. He often thought about that crossroads and the day he stopped waiting. One afternoon, a young woman walked into his workshop. Her clothes were worn, her eyes were tired, and she carried a notebook filled with sketches. She looked lost and unsure. She approached him hesitantly. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling. "I have these ideas, but I feel so small. I feel like I'm starting with nothing. Everyone tells me to get a real job. I don't know if I have what it takes." Arjun looked at her and saw his own reflection from years ago. He didn't see a failure. He saw potential waiting to be unleashed. He saw the fear, the doubt, and the fire buried underneath. He smiled gently and gestured for her to sit. "Let me tell you a story," he began. He told her about a young man who was waiting for someone to save him. He told her about a crossroads, a garage, a table, and a businessman who walked away. He told her about the sleepless nights, the discipline that built an empire, and the day he decided to stop waiting and start acting. It looked her in the eye and said, "You were not born to live an ordinary life. You were born with limitless potential. But potential means nothing without action. Dreams don't work unless you do. Your pain is not your weakness, it is your power. Every failure you face is a lesson. Every rejection is a redirection." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The world doesn't need someone perfect. It needs someone who never gives up. And that someone is you. You are not here by accident. You have a purpose. You have something inside you that the world needs. So rise up, stand strong, and take control of your life. Your story is just getting started." The young woman's eyes welled up with tears, but for the first time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of recognition. She saw in his journey the blueprint for her own. She saw that he had been where she was, and he had made it through. As she left the workshop that day, she clutched her notebook a little tighter, her shoulders a little straighter. She was no longer waiting for the perfect time, for perfect conditions, for someone to push her forward. She was going to save herself, and as Arjun watched her go, he understood. His story wasn't just about his own success. It was about becoming the person who could stand at the crossroads for someone else and show them the way. His struggles, his failures, his comebacks, it all had a purpose. It had shaped him into someone who could inspire. He smiled, remembering his grandmother's words, and whispered to the wind, "I didn't quit." He had walked his path, fought his battles, and in doing so had become unstoppable. And now his story would inspire others to do the same, because the future we dream of is not built by waiting. It is built by the choices we make today. It is built in struggle, in sacrifice, in showing up even when we don't feel like it. It is built one small, consistent step at a time. So like Arjun, you are standing at a crossroads. One path leads to excuses, the other leads to greatness. And the choice is yours. Your breakthrough is closer than you think. Don't stop walking. Your story is just getting started.